Hi everybody, I'm Dustin.
I'm Onna, and we are not qualified to investigate the paranormal, but we might be more qualified than...
The law. That was a little slurred. The law.
The law personified. The whole law. Law enforcement people.
Like when you say the law, it's like the fuzz, the cops.
Right. The ones who are going to get you.
Yeah, police officers.
It's police
peace officers, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever they prefer to be called.
Okay. All right. Well, you have some law enforcement background.
I do.
So you're more
federal
qualified
law enforcement, yes.
than yourself.
Yes. That completely makes sense. Than 25-year-old Dustin.
Okay.
Yes.
I see. At this point in your life, you're more qualified than your former self. I would say the same about myself.
Oh, good. I'm glad we're on the same page finally. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Let's get started.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. If this is your first time listening in, then welcome in. We have such a robust story tonight that we just got to get into it. I actually have this front loaded with, there are so many people involved with the list of witnesses, and there is no picture or video evidence that I can show you today. This is all eyewitness account.
Okay.
I think I've talked about it before. This is probably the story that made me want to start this podcast.
That's so important.
Yeah. So here it is, folks. The story. And I'm going to give you the cast of characters. Are you ready?
Okay.
The first is Don Decker, a 21-year-old on furlough from his jail sentence for a minor theft to attend the funeral of his grandfather, James Kisson.
Okay. James is the father of, what's his name again?
James is the grandfather of Don.
Don. D-O-N.
Yep.
Okay.
Bob and Jeannie Kiefer, family friends and host of Don Decker during his furlough.
Don, Bob, and Jeannie.
Oh, we're not done yet.
Okay.
We've got many more to go.
Making a visual in my head of all these casts.
Ron and Romaine Van Wy, the Kiefer's landlord. Patrolman Richard Wolbert, the first responding officer.
Mm-hmm.
Officer John Baujean. I think that's how you pronounce this name. Officer Wolbert's partner and second official on scene.
John.
B-A-U-J-A-N. Baujean. John Baujean. That's like John Valjean.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's
This
French.
is Les Mis. I'm reading you Les Mis.
Okay.
I'll probably say Baujean. I don't know. I'll probably mispronounce it 10 times throughout this episode. It'll bother me when I go back and listen to it, but here we are.
Anybody who still listens is not concerned about you mispronouncing this.
Gary Roberts, the chief of police.
Gary.
Pam Scrofano, owner and manager of the local pizza restaurant. Warden Keatonhold.
There's a warden involved.
Warden of the prison that Don was serving time in.
Wow. Okay.
And Reverend William Blackburn.
Wow.
The priest at the prison.
Okay. You have quite a cast of characters.
I do. All of these people come in. I'm going to directly quote them, and I'll let you know I'm directly quoting them. And actually, the last half, I didn't have time to finish writing the story narrative, but it was okay because the people involved, their direct quotes from the official reports are enough to fill you on what happens.
Wow. So you've got multiple official reports.
Yes.
Sheriff, warden, yeah.
Kind of.
Different context, different institution.
We'll get into it a little bit, but yes, there are official police reporting. There are people who are just friends. There are people who aren't friends, who are proprietors, places. Yeah, this comes from this is a very wide-reaching story when it comes to the types of players involved.
Yeah. Is that the whole cast?
That's the cast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before you get into the story, because I'm very excited for you to tell me the story that got you into this, I think I've heard this one.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This is one of the most widely known, controversial paranormal stories.
Yeah. So obviously I don't want to say primed because I don't have a strong feeling about it, except that I'm vaguely remembering some things. Like, is there water involved?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Lots of water.
It is the story that okay.
As a matter of fact, the name of this story is The Rain Man.
The Rain Man. Tell me the story of the Rain Man.
In the quaint town of Strasburg, Pennsylvania, under a sky heavy with winter clouds, a story began to unfold that would give everyone involved second thoughts about the paranormal. At its heart was a young man named Don Decker, who bore the weight of a troubled past and a recent loss. The death of Don's grandfather, a man shadowed by allegations of cruelty and abuse, had stirred something inexplicable in the air. Granted a short leave from the confines of jail to attend the funeral, Don found temporary refuge at the home of Bob and Jeannie Kiefer. The house, a modest structure nestled on a sleepy street, was about to become the stage for events that would challenge the fabric of reality.
I was like,
The evening started in a very normal manner, with Don and the Kiefers having good conversation and catching up, as well as talking about Don's plans for the future. As dinner time approached, Don went into the upstairs restroom to wash up before dinner. As he was washing his hands, he felt the room go cold. Looking around the room, he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but something caught his eye in the window. Staring back at him was the face of an old man with a menacing grin. Don was suddenly pushed against the wall and scratched 3 times on his wrist. As Don got up and was able to regain his wits, he looked up at the windows, but the face was gone. He looked down at his hand and saw blood dripping from the scratches that had appeared. Don took a deep breath, regained some semblance of composure, cleaned his wounds, and walked downstairs to join the Kiefers for dinner. I'm gonna pause here. So this is like the first part of this story. This is really where the story kicks off.
and what year is this again?
1983.
83. Very classic horror movie stuff. He's in a bathroom. He sees something in reflection, a face. He jumps back. He gets these mysterious scratches.
He was thrown back,
Okay, I'm sorry.
according to his
I'm sorry.
accounts.
Editorializing.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, but you bring up some good points, right? We can see how a young man who is, first of all, serving a prison sentence, second of all, attending the funeral of a man who abused him.
Mm-hmm.
He's not even staying with his parents because he's kind of like, I don't want to hear you guys pay lip service to this asshole.
Yeah, he's already kind of guarding himself.
Yeah, he's already guarding himself. Anything, he could slip, he could fall. We've talked about how sometimes we see that you can inexplicably see the dead of love. You can see that.
Oh, yeah.
You see, not Sixth Sense style.
Inexplicably see the dead. Yeah, no.
We can see the dead
Yes.
sometimes. It's
Yeah.
weird.
People have various kinds of visions of the people that they lost.
Right. And to the person out there would say, let's say it was somebody, looking in at him. It was the second floor, right? So they would have had to have crawled up on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty unlikely. He could have seen his own reflection in.
This was after dinner.
No,
Is it?
right before dinner.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
I don't
right
know
before dinner.
What time of year in Pennsylvania?
Winter.
Yeah.
Winter or fall. It was cold.
Probably dark
Yeah.
outside. Uh-huh.
It was dark outside, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. I want to continue.
Yeah, I have thoughts. Please continue.
This is a very long story though. So if you have thoughts that you want to say right now, you can.
Okay, I'll just make one comment because I think
Yeah.
if you're going to build upon different paranormal phenomena, and by the end, I might be like, I have no explanation for any of this. I think I want to touch on the scratches because that happens a lot, or across different stories or fiction or whatever. But
Yeah.
the ghost scratched me kind of thing. And I think what's an interesting piece here is he's thrown backwards. He's in a small space, and I don't think people acknowledge enough the most likely explanation for these kinds of scratches is we are very fragile creatures and we get scratched and nicked when we bump into things. I was just thinking that. That's it.
Yeah, I think on the paranormal side of the house, people would say 3 scratches is indicative of demonic entities doing that. It's the 3 scratches, right? Which, if you think about it,
I figured it had to be a number of scratches.
Yeah, well, like if it's just a scratch,
like the violence from
that's a ghost, right? But if it's 3 scratches, it's indicative of a demon or demonic possession.
Why?
I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me because if you think about 3, you think about like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You think about kind of the quote unquote good side. 3 is one of those mystical numbers, right?
Okay.
There's 3, there's 7, there's 12, there's 24. There's all those magic numbers or mystical numbers that are repetitive within religion, within magic, any kind of belief that a lot of people have.
Varies.
Yeah. But also those numbers have significance within math too, right? Because some of them are prime numbers, numbers that continually show up for like numerology purposes. So
you just he did air quotes.
I did air quotes for numerology because numerology is just when numbers add up to things. I'm sorry.
Are we doing an episode on numerology?
Well, it's like, God, what's Bill Gates' middle name? It's William something Gates, and if you add all those together, it's 666 or something. I don't. It's that kind of stupid shit.
Yes, we should
that's
do
numerology.
an episode on numerology.
Yeah, we should do an episode on Bill Gates.
Okay, so the scratches appearing in 3s might not just be malevolence, but like a particular significance to say it's a demon, not just a malevolent spirit.
Maybe demons have 3 claws.
That's where my mind went at first, but I think I didn't really have more interest in physical manifestations of things. So Yeah, I think the most probably, and this isn't necessarily like a psychology or scientific, it's just the most practical. I
Right.
always go to
No, I get it.
environmental causes.
Yeah.
Environmental, you fell, you bumped it, you scratched
And
yourself.
when a lot of the times when these ghost hunters are in places, they're in like derelict buildings.
Yes,
I've been in many derelict and bombed out buildings crawling around before, and I got scratched a
a
lot by
ton.
rebar sticking out of
Yeah,
concrete,
yeah,
by by the concrete itself because it had
yeah,
been bombed. I've been injured before, right?
right.
Not severely or anything like that. And
Yeah.
for 3 points to make contact on skin, that kind of makes sense actually that it would be three, around three because
What
if you think
our
about like
longest
touching a
three.
surface, your body's kind of gonna probably react after hitting that first one if it's super sharp.
Okay.
But if it's jagged, then think
Uh-huh.
about like a serrated knife,
Yeah.
like and it's not even, then
Uh-huh.
like three kind of makes sense. Three or
Yeah.
four makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. To me, it
Maybe.
makes
I mean, we
sense.
have our three longest fingers, like pretty easily
Yeah.
scratched with those three fingers.
Right.
If he could have just scratched himself, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point that people are often in these old houses where you can get easily dinged up, but it's also in an unfamiliar place. That's where I get most dinged up. So anybody who's ever moved into a new house or been in someone else's house, bumped their
Right.
knees, all that. Anyway, we're taking up a lot of time with that.
Yeah.
Just okay, next part.
As they finished dinner, Bob saw the marks on Don's wrist and asked, "What did you do?" Don replied, "It wasn't me. It was the man upstairs in the window." Thinking that this was a reaction from the day's events, Bob disregarded it as something having to do with Don's conflicting feelings for his deceased grandfather. But as the night moved on, a noticeable change descended upon the house. It began subtly at first with a chill that seemed to emanate from Don himself, as if the grief he carried was seeping into the room. Then, without warning, water began to manifest, defying all logic and reason. Droplets formed on the walls and the ceilings as if the very air wept. This inexplicable phenomenon left Don and his host in a state of bewildered terror.
Yeah, this is what I heard, and it escalates from here.
It sure
It
does.
sure does.
The couple called their landlord, Ron Van Wy, to come over and ensure that this was not something easily explainable. Ron and his wife, Romaine, showed up and conducted a preliminary inspection of the pipes and the surrounding area.
That night?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a fast response by a landlord.
Yeah, I think, and if you listen to like Bob, because Bob talks about this in many interviews, he says, I got on the phone and I was like, you just need to get over here. And Ron was like, do I really need to come over tonight? And he's like, yes, you need to get over here right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a leak or there's something going on,
Mhm.
right? Which makes sense. If you're a landlord and you hear that there's water coming from the ceiling and it's pouring out,
Mhm.
you need to get there immediately because
Mhm.
the longer that goes, the more damage that's going to do.
Yeah.
So they figured out that the water was coming from a part of the house that had no plumbing.
Mm.
Now, that can happen. Water can run down drywall, plaster, whatever the ceiling's made out of, and then start dripping in a place that's not there.
Okay.
So they start doing inspections, and here's actually our first direct quote. This is from Ron. Ron said, afterwards, we decided maybe it was the plumbing, but there were no pipes in the front end of the house to leak. There was basically nothing there that the water could have come from. After watching it for a while, I discovered that it wasn't only coming from the ceiling down. It could come from the wall over or from the floor up. There was no basic direction that it was coming from. It could come from anywhere.
Hmm.
So water was defying the laws of
Mm-hmm.
gravity
Mm-hmm.
and physics. But, anybody who's been in a really bad rainstorm, water, remember Forrest Gump when he's like, sometimes water would come up from underneath,
Mm-hmm.
It's just sometimes water bounces, like for sure it does things, but it would be very strange to walk into a room where water was coming down or going up and
Yeah.
seeing it go up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not bouncing necessarily, it's being shot up, which is
It's dripping up.
right. And remember, this is 1983, so you could probably order something on Amazon now that you could somehow rig into something that's going to shoot water up from the floor, if you're trying to do a prank. But 1983, this would be something very elaborate that you would have to be an engineer to build.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you'd probably hear the pumps going and there would be something that you would notice, right? But just trying to think about this logic, if you're like, okay, I'm trying to find an explanation for this. Let's say it's a hoax, because that'll come up a few times during the story. If it was a hoax, it was a very elaborate hoax that took a lot of people to agree and continue to agree for 40 years that this is the story they were going to say and this was how they were going to do it.
Yeah.
And some people, I think, had to not be in on it, which means they would have had to produce water flying from the ceiling, water flying from the floor.
Yeah. I have no response to that.
This finding, mixed with the house's eerie feeling and some doors opening and closing on their own, prompted Ron and Bob to call the local authorities. Police officers Wolbert and Boujon were skeptical, yet knew they had a duty to investigate. As they stepped into the house, they were greeted by the same unnerving spectacle. The sight of water trickling down the walls in defiance of nature's laws left them grappling for explanations. Could it be a plumbing issue, a trick, or something far more inexplicable? At one point, a large drop of water formed in between the officers and Bob as they were talking, paused in front of them, and flew horizontally into the dark kitchen of the house. At this point, knowing they were outside of their wheelhouse, the officers left to go get the chief of police and suggested that the family leave the house until he arrived to investigate.
I love this. Whose idea again was it to call the police?
I think it was the landlord's, but I think probably Bob at that point was like, let's call the cops.
Why?
I get this from a sense of, and this happened with the Edenfield haunting too. Something's going on. Who else? It's who you're gonna call, right?
It is.
There's no Ghostbusters. So who are you gonna call? You're gonna call 911. I think for a couple of reasons. One, you need an authority figure there to say, okay, this is crazy, like to be in a formal report, to be written down somewhere and acknowledged by somebody other than these people involved, because otherwise everybody's just going to call you crazy and say it was a hoax.
I do. I think it was a very smart move to call the police. I think it's surprising for all those reasons. Who's going to help us? Who's going to validate that this is real and then maybe do anything about it? And there are no Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Nobody to call.
So you call the cops.
You call who apparently were more qualified than.
They're able to give an official report.
That's right.
That's really important.
And that is important for posterity.
Officer Wolbert said later, at this point he, meaning Ron, was telling me, I just want you to walk into the house. I said, I'm not walking into the house unless you explain to me what I'm walking into. He says, trust me, just walk into the house. I walked in the door and he came right in behind me, and I couldn't get more than 2 steps inside the door and I was absolutely pelted. We were just standing inside the front door and met this droplet of water traveling horizontally. It passed between us and just traveled out into the next room. So that's a direct quote from him on his eyewitness accounts. So I'll bring up at this point that there have been 2 TV dramatizations of this event.
I was going to ask, it's so interesting. How were the effects on those? Did you watch any clips of it?
Oh, well, the first one was Unsolved Mysteries, and that was done, I think, back in like the 90s. So not great. It was just water pouring from everywhere. Oh, yeah. No, actually, it was like that kind of 90s water effect that they used to do that was terrible.
I want to pull up a clip of that.
The next one was Sci-Fi Channel has a ghost retelling story where they dramatize people's ghost stories. I think it's called Hauntings. There's Hauntings and there's something else that's on Netflix. They're both really well done. They get pretty decent actors and actresses, and then the special effects are obviously much better than they were in the 90s.
Yeah.
So I watched both. Obviously, you should watch the more recent one to get a better example. But I will also say that there were some players that were missing in the newer one. They might be dead, right? It was 40 years ago, so maybe they just couldn't get those people on to give their eyewitness accounts. The chain of events didn't change, but they did leave some stuff out of the new one. And I think there's a reason for that.
There's a reason that they left out some of the eyewitness accounts that were less reliable or less
we'll get into that.
Okay.
We're going to get into it.
Okay, continue, please.
Okay. The Kiefers, with Don among them, decided to visit a local pizzeria, a place where the warm glow of the ovens and the familiar bustle of diners promised a reprieve from the surreal events of the evening. Ron and his wife stayed behind in the house to see if they could figure anything else out. Ron later said, they left, and everything else left too. The rain stopped. The house was normal. We were kind of thinking that maybe it was coming from them, and we weren't sure at that time which one. Okay, so the Kiefers are the people who live in the house who are hosting Don. They are friends of Don. They're family friends. So they went with Don to the pizzeria. They walked. It's within walking distance of this house to go to this pizzeria. Ron and his wife stayed behind and said what I just said.
That makes sense.
The group, hoping to leave the unexplained behind, walked towards the pizzeria, unknowingly carrying the mystery with them. Little did they know the events of the house were just the beginning of a story that would soon become the talk of the town and the world. because it was on Unsolved Mysteries. As the group entered the pizzeria, they were welcomed by the comforting ambience of the bustling eatery, a stark contrast to the eerie events that they had just experienced. The owner, Pam Scorafano, a woman known for her hearty laughter and no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them with a warm smile. Unaware of the strange phenomenon that had been following Don, she showed them into a booth where the aroma of freshly baked pizza and simmering sauces enveloped them. Yeah, right? I'm hungry.
After all that poltergeisting, I'm hungry.
That's right. The initial sense of normalcy, however, was short-lived. As they began to settle in and place their orders, a sudden chill permeated the air around Don. The atmosphere shifted palpably, and an uneasy silence fell over the pizzeria. An uneasy silence fell under the pizzeria. I don't know why that popped in my head just now. Then, as if in a surreal replay of the events earlier, water droplets began to materialize around Don, falling not from the ceiling, but as if conjured from thin air. The pizzeria's patrons, along with staff, watched in stunned silence. The owner, a religious woman, grabbed her rosary and approached Don's table. She observed the unexplained rain with a mixture of awe and apprehension, and placed the rosary around Don's neck. Don screamed in agony as the crucifix burned his skin, and at the same time, the rain stopped.
Where was the rain? Just over their table?
I think at this point it was, yes. I think it was just on that. No. I think it was throughout the... No, actually, I have Pam.
Okay.
Pam's got a quote here. Pam said later, "You looked at Donnie and he was like in a trance. He would look at you but not knowing you were there. I said, Jeannie, he's got to be possessed." Because that's what I think about people who are just staring off into the distance. We're sitting there. A couple of seconds later, there was water all over the pizzeria too. I've never seen anything like that happen. I went in the cash register. I had a crucifix in there. I took it out and put it on him. And the minute I put it on him and it touched his skin, he got burned. There's no way that anybody could have played a joke like that. This was real. Donnie was doing it himself. He was doing it without realizing he was doing it.
And
so water all over the pizzeria.
All over the place. And you said there's no evidence of the burn marks or anything? Or the scratches? There's no pictures?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that skeptics say about this story, is that although photography was readily available, there's no photographs of
anything.
Now, with that being said, 1983, for some of our listeners, this might be hard to imagine. Sorry, photography was not readily available.
Yeah, right.
We had those like 110 cameras. Remember those like little thin cameras with like the 110 film?
Yeah.
Those were kind of there. There was
were barely by the late 90s.
There was Polaroids. Mm-hmm. There was Polaroids, and there were 35 millimeters.
Expensive.
But it was super expensive.
So expensive. But police officers should have someone with a camera.
Right.
The people in their house, maybe not. People in a pizzeria, very unlikely that anybody's gonna have a camera around. But the police officer should have had a camera.
And they might have, but there's a wrench in the works for that too, coming up here.
Oh boy.
But I don't agree. I think there's plenty of other explanations for what's going on here. I don't think that that's the best one to latch onto, because I'm sorry, no, photography was not readily available. It was not easily accessible. If you weren't middle class, lower class, sure. They didn't even have disposable cameras back then.
Oh, no. Yeah, it would be, there were cameras in institutions like hospitals, police stations, DMVs, obviously, and even the cameras with police stations, you'd have to probably call for someone to bring a camera to an investigation. Yeah. The responding officer wouldn't have a camera.
Right.
That probably didn't happen until really smartphones.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm still curious as to why at the house they had follow-up officers come, as you said, and no one brought a camera or was told to bring a camera.
We're going to get into that in a second.
Okay.
And not specifically about the camera, but about a player who's involved who might have told him not to take pictures.
Oh boy.
Immediately after returning to the house, the rain started again. Romaine and Jeannie decided to confront Don and ask him why and how he was doing this. They took him into the kitchen and talked to him, but Don didn't answer. He just stared blankly. Frustrated with the lack of response, the women began to yell at Don to make it stop. At this point, the whole house began to shake. Doors and cupboards were opening and closing on their own, and Don lifted into the air and hovered for several seconds before being flung to the floor. Romaine had no choice but to start reading from the Bible.
Okay. Yeah, hell, I don't know if I wouldn't do the same thing.
Totally agree.
If this happened. Who? Any other person?
During this whole thing, too, the chief did show up for a very short period of time. So while the women are yelling at him, Officer Beaujean shows up again. But Officer Beaujean later said, when the chief got into the house, he was pelted with water, just as Rich and I were. I got the impression that he was put on the spot, maybe a little bit embarrassed, like we expected something out of him that he could answer. There was no way to explain what happened. I think he was put in a position where he might have felt a little uncomfortable. The police chief announced that the problem was a plumbing issue and ordered his officers to leave the Kiefer house. Officer Beaujean said they were told not to file a report and not even to talk about the incident. Well, he just flat out denied it. It didn't happen. And he tried to convince me that nothing happened, and he wasn't going to do that. I saw it, and that's all there is to it.
Who's that?
That's Officer Beaujean.
Okay.
Two things just happened. One, the women confronted Don and were like, make it stop. Don didn't respond. He flew into the air and hovered. Everybody saw this, by the way. So, I'm sorry, the two couples saw it. So the Kiefers and the landlords.
But no law enforcement.
No.
Allegedly, because they never wrote a report.
No officers saw that.
Okay.
But there's another part coming up here that the officers did see.
So, but if I understand you correctly, the chief is saying, don't write a report to the responding officer.
So don't write a report. This is a plumbing issue. And he basically said he didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, I listened to another Skeptics podcast on this, and I think they found out that this chief was up for re-election very soon. And so if he was to go on record saying, you know, a demon's making it rain in this guy's house, that might have put a damper on his...
Is it cheated? Sheriff is elected. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I think they are. I think, well, at least in this town they were.
Right.
Yeah.
Different
who knows? Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. But anyway, so a lot going on there. A lot to unpack with motives. The chief tells them not to do their thing, but they ignore him. They eventually ignore him and they go back because they're friends with the people who live there and they didn't want to leave them hanging.
Yeah.
So he flies in the air. He hovers for a few seconds and then he's thrown once again into a corner.
And at this point, the two women are, so he's the woman who lives in the house with her husband. The two of them were at the restaurant with Dawn. And now they've come back
the friends
to the house.
Were at, yes,
and
Bob and, what's her name?
Jan?
Jeannie.
Like a Jeannie? Okay.
Bob and Jeannie.
Okay, so they've been with Dawn the whole time. He's just had an episode at the pizza place. Did he communicate at all through any of this? Or was he in that like catatonic?
He was it sounds like for the most part, he was in trance-like state. He wasn't really, every once in a while he would say, there's a part coming up where he talks a little bit, but it's not like he's really talking to anybody in particular. He's pretty much just staring forward.
So he's sort of dissociating this whole time. It goes, if you're to say catatonic, but he's dissociative like the whole time from as soon as he leaves the bathroom. Or no, it was after he said, the water starts after dinner and he's like, this is my grandfather. And then after that, he's pretty much dissociates. Yes. Even when they're like, let's go get some pizza, he's just kind of with them.
He's just with them.
Okay. Yeah. And so he comes back.
Every eyewitness account that they have, every quote I have is like, Don was just staring into the distance.
Okay.
Don was just looking at the corner of the room. He's not really responding to anything.
Okay. So then he comes back to the house and the landlord and his wife are there again. So you said the two women in the kitchen are with him. Yeah. Everybody, both couples.
The two men are standing out in the next room over. So they do see, he's staying in the doorway. So they see him lift up off the ground and get flung.
Okay. They see the alleged levitation, because I'm trying to think like the things that have been added on now. Right. Because we've got the bathroom haunting, no witnesses for that. We've got the water.
Well, Don.
Yeah. Witnesses are different from, like there's a witness, but then there's also like the victim.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? I don't know, from a law enforcement perspective. And then there's the burning of the crucifix, the levitation. Okay. Yep. Just making sure all the boxes of paranormal things are
right. The burn and the rain.
Oh, of course, the water. All the water. Okay, moving on.
Okay, and then also the last thing is Romaine. She starts reading from the Bible, passages from the Bible. One of the officers did go back because they were like, we need to help these people. We need to figure something out. And he went back while she was reading. And the rain, apparently, I don't have this in the story, but the rain was just following her. Like she was walking back and forth reading the Bible and the rain was following her. Wow. It was only raining on her.
Oh, such cool visuals.
Right?
The idea of it, like following her like a cloud or like spraying at her from the side. This is what a special effects crew would want to know. Where are we spraying the water?
This activity continued for 3 more days.
That's what I read right there. Wow.
On the 3rd day, Ron finally called a priest to come in and perform a cleansing. Ron later said, as she started to pray, Donnie went into a convulsion. He started to shake. He pulled himself into a ball, and the longer she prayed, he started to relax then.
So what day was this?
The third day.
The third day. So
And
the
this
other 2
priest
days-
refuses to be identified. So I didn't have her name in here, but it's a female priest who comes in, or a female pastor comes in to cleanse.
Yeah, so it's
Not a Catholic priest, right? Romain confirmed his whole body seemed to quiet completely down, and as you're standing there watching this, you could feel the house itself seem to take on a totally different feeling. Ron followed up with, and by the time she got done praying, the water was gone, and that was the last time we saw any water at that house at all.
But isn't it like flooded at this point? Like damaged 3 days of...
That's a really good question. I don't think so.
So it's so paranormal that there's no remaining evidence of the water.
There you go.
Isn't that convenient?
There's no water damage anywhere.
Yeah.
That's convenient for the landlord.
Sure is. It's also, yeah, the couple being like, oh, well, it stops every now and then, it's gone. We can just let him stay in our house for 3 days. I know they're family friends and they wanted to be there for him. It's just surprising once you think you have the source that they were screaming at him and then they let him stay. There's sort of interesting interpersonal stuff going on. I don't really understand.
Well, he got hurt when they screamed at him. So
Yeah. So, okay, so their mood might have changed. This would be all the dynamics that would be in a movie version of this, right?
yeah.
Mhm.
And so there is another scene that I took out of this because it wasn't in both of the reenactments. It was only in one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they go to get Don. The police officers they put a crucifix in his hand as well, and they see it burn him. He goes, it's hot. And the officer said, when I picked it up off the floor, he's like, it wasn't boiling hot, but it was warm. It was not as warm as when I put it in his hand. He only had it in his hand for like a couple seconds before he dropped it. And then he also once again got picked up in front of the officers and then flung against the wall. Now, with that can somewhat be easily explained maybe by saying that these officers got rowdy with him and threw him against the wall. And then they were like, it was paranormal.
This is where behavioral stuff can be really, it can be exaggerated, minimized, depending on the person telling it. And so eyewitness stuff gets really tricky.
And this is all eyewitness.
Yeah.
But it is multiple eyewitnesses, which is interesting. That's what always kind of brings me back to this story. But when I'm thinking, I don't think about ancient Rome. I think about paranormal stories. And this is my ancient Rome. This is my paranormal story that I come back to.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who don't know, there was a study done recently on...
It's not a study. There
was an article about...
Online thing.
Yeah, an online thing about how men apparently think about ancient Rome way more often than anybody ever thought they did.
Yeah, there's a whole SNL sketch.
Yeah. Anyway. So then they bring the pastor or the holy person in to do the cleansing. She does the cleansing and everything stops in the house.
Who brought the pastor in?
Ron.
The landlord.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I know who Ron is now. So I don't know his wife's name. Okay. There's just, there's so much.
We're not done yet.
Okay. Keep going. I'm just pulling it all together in my head. Mm-hmm.
After the bewildering events at the Kiefer's home and the local pizzeria, Don Decker's temporary release from jail came to an end. He found himself back within the austere walls of the prison, a stark contrast to the world where he had become known as the Rain Man. Within the confines of a cell, Don's thoughts turned again to the mysterious rain. It wasn't long before these thoughts manifested into reality. Water defying all logic began to emerge from the concrete floor of his cell. According to Don, he now realized he could control the rain at will. A skeptical guard challenged him to make it rain in Warden Dave Keenhold's office. Warden Keenhold recalled, I was sitting at the desk, writing a report. I was all by myself, in the administration area. Nobody else was around. It was approximately 8 o'clock in the evening. At the time, I didn't feel anything, but my shirt was drooping down. An officer entered and told Warden Keenhold to look at his shirt, and right about at the center of my sternum, about 4 inches long, 2 inches wide, I was just saturated with water. I was startled. I was scared. The officer was frightened at that particular time. I just didn't have any explanation for why it happened. The warden called in Reverend William Blackburn. All of a sudden, I received this frantic call from the sergeant in the jail, and he said, "Can you come over? We need you. We need your help." So we brought this very meek and mild-mannered young man into the room, and he was asking for my help. Don told the Reverend that he can make it rain, and that crosses placed on his body burned. According to Reverend Blackburn, he told Don to admit that he was just making things up. All of a sudden, his demeanor changed, and this smell came into the room. Nurses and doctors, medical people, say that when you walk into a room where someone is dying with a cancer or something, usually there's a smell. You can tell when you walk in the room. I smelled a smell that multiplied 5 times at least. evil foreboding. He raised his hand and rubbed his fingers together, and all of a sudden, it started to rain. It was like the devil's rain. It was a mist. I was in the presence of evil. I opened up the Bible and started to read to him, but the pages never got wet. So help me, it was a frightening thing. I think I was praying more for me than for him. I prayed, and it was only a brief period, and then the rain stopped. Reverend Blackburn said he noticed a sudden change in Don as well. He subsided, and you could feel a peace. He said thank you. He got tears in his eyes. We hugged and prayed together. He was possessed. There was no doubt in my mind. There's no way a human could do what he did in that room. There's no way that he did anything, but what he did was spiritual, and it wasn't of God. Guaranteed it was not of God. Don Decker said that he feels like the bizarre occurrence won't happen again. Well, it's over. It hasn't happened again. Basically, I'm just hoping that it never will. And I just, go day to day. As for my grandfather, I think what happened was his doing. Because he abused me when I was young, he got a chance to abuse me once again. And that's the last of the Don Decker story.
Wow.
Don Decker was recently rearrested for arson. Well, not recently, 2012.
He switched from water to fire.
He switched from water to fire. That's right. The Haunting episode was redone recently within the last 5 years. Again, stories stay the same. Special effects get better. So it's much better to watch that one if that's what you're looking for. There were a lot of different parts of the story that I left out because they weren't in both of them, because they weren't part of the tale that has stayed consistent. I touched on some of them while we went through it, but...
A lot of parts like that?
No. Like the pizzeria thing they cut out completely, which is interesting in the new one. But again, the pizzeria owner might not be around anymore. She was kind of old back in the 80s and 90s. So, that's, it is what it is.
And over the
she was also kind of like, I don't want to say kooky, but she was also like, I knew he was possessed as soon as I saw him. He sounded like a Southern preacher. It was kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I overheard that clip. You should put that in the show notes.
Okay. No, I'll put both these in the show notes. The Unsolved Mysteries, I think, is free on YouTube. I'll make sure to put that link in the show notes.
Right, because that's one piece that I can touch on, from a psychology perspective, is that people confuse dissociative reactions, trauma reactions, psychotic episodes with possession, and that has been happening for millennia.
Right, and I would say if it was just Dawn doing the thing, getting the scratches, seeing things, then we've already talked about this a million times. We've already talked about psychotic episodes, people not wanting to admit that's what they are, whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's the physical manifestation of the rain that really kind of drives it home for me, and it is something that, again, this could totally be a hoax.
Okay, so that's the other piece that, I'm sitting here okay, the behavioral parts of Don himself, his even flying across the room, these things are, I quote, eyewitness, and there can be just a lot of exaggeration that happens when people are behaving really erratically and lunging violently at themselves or away. So I don't really hold all of that as unexplainable. It's the water. The water is unexplainable. Unless you have thoughts. I don't, because if it did travel with him out of that house, then it's very difficult to say it was environmental.
I don't. When we learn about, I promise this will go somewhere, in a previous life, I learned about surveillance detection. So how to detect someone's tailing you, basically. And time, distance, and direction are the three things that you're kind of looking for. So in other words, you pick three places that are totally different distances apart, totally different directions apart, and totally different times of travel apart. And if you see the same person in each three of those places, then you probably got someone tailing you, right? This is like that, right? This is the time, distance, direction, where I guess the pizzeria and the house are pretty close together, but the jail's not. Yeah. The jail's pretty far away, right? And so with that third place and this happening a third time with different eyewitnesses, it's hard to dispute. It's hard to say. It's the Dana Carvey stand-up where he talks about how the OJ, it's a conspiracy against OJ, and he's like, it's too big. It's like framing OJ in. He's like, there'd have to be too many people involved for this to be a true conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about this. Now, correctional officers and law enforcement officers are usually simpatico, friendly, whatever. They know each other.
Yeah, especially in a place where people are getting furloughed.
Yeah.
To the community, there's a trust there.
There's a trust with Don there, but Don, again, he wasn't there for anything. he wasn't a violent person. Obviously, he had a very calm demeanor. He was there for minor theft. And if you read a little bit into his life, he's like, yeah, I got involved with the wrong people, and
He's
I
pretty
just
young.
I got wrapped up in something that was above me, and I got caught. And obviously the Kiefers trusted him to come into their house. I think they had kids too. They trusted him as family friends, and they were talking to him about what he's going to do when he gets out, and like all this stuff. He was out for a very sad reason, and for a reason he might not have wanted to be out for, but he was hopeful for the future. And that's another thing that kind of drives this home. Maybe, hey guys, let's do this big hoax, and then we can all get rich off of writing a movie, writing a book, writing, whatever, Amityville Horror style.
Yeah, these are some of my questions. Were there newspapers and TV crews coming over those 3 days? Is there any external?
Not over the 3 days, only
incentive?
after, right? Only because so many people, and you can kind of see this side of it too. There were so many law enforcement officers or people of authority who were like, I'm not talking about this. I'm not risking my career. I'm not, people are going to think I'm crazy if I tell you this. There's probably that fear of, and if we call the news crews now, it's going to stop before they get here, right? And then everybody's going to be like, what are you guys talking about? But they eventually did talk about it on Unsolved Mysteries in the 90s. Both officers get on there, and the warden get on there, and they talk. One of the officers and the warden get back, and they talk on the new one.
But the chief not.
The chief never shows up. No, he never acknowledges it. Never shows up.
Yeah.
I don't know if they called him for an interview, and he just said no, but he didn't.
Wow. So
and that almost he's almost the exception that proves it, right? Where it's like, well, there was one person there who was like, I'm not talking about this, and refuses to talk about it still. If this were a hoax, it's masterful in that
who do
design.
you think initiated the hoax? Let's go down the hoax route.
If it was a hoax,
would be the most logical explanation of a hoax?
I think the correctional officers, they would have to kind of put it into Don's head, like, hey, we got a busted pipe here. Let's see if we can kind of recreate this elsewhere and get everybody involved.
Oh, so before he went on furlough.
Yeah, you can go on furlough if you help us make millions of dollars with this story.
Interesting. So it was like a plan, and then they got.
But that's what I'm saying. It's so flimsy, right? It would almost have to be Don, but again, he's locked up in prison, so he can't set up any kind of effects or anything like that within a house. He can call, I guess, and have it set up.
It's very illogical, if you're right, that with the means that they had at that time to be like, we're going to do a hoax. Okay, socioculturally, was there anything else going on around this time that would fit in that? Like there was a lot of satanic panic.
Yeah, and the possession thing, yeah.
Was there a lot of possession stuff going on? I think
well, no. The satanic panic would have been, possessions would have been a part of that.
Yeah.
The Exorcist came out, what?
Late 70s.
79, yeah, 78, 79, so a few years before. So that was on everybody's mind. And the belief that, there was no internet, so you'd hear a story and you'd believe it. If someone was like, my cousin was possessed by the devil.
It's just so hard to see
my aunt talks to angels
for this. Like, if no one has since found evidence of any incentive for that kind of a hoax, but because the couple would have to be in on it, the landlord would have to be in on it.
Yeah. The law enforcement would have to be in on it, the correctional officers would have to be in on it, the priest would have to be in on it.
Yeah.
There's just
the pastor and the reverend, like
time,
two different
distance, direction.
Yeah.
There's too many with all of these.
And you and I haven't talked a lot about hoaxes. I tend to try to have good faith. Okay.
Right.
Obviously, any of the things we've talked about so far could just be hoaxes or lies, people telling stories. But we usually try to say, okay, say the person believes that it happened to them, or that we tend to try to go that way. Yeah. But this is one where it's really hard to explain otherwise.
Right.
Otherwise, yeah.
Now it is just eyewitness accounts.
So therein lies if it all happened in one location, to kind of go back to your point about this, very suspicious that it's multiple locations and different groups of people. But yeah, eyewitness accounts, I think I talked a bit about before, are not super reliable. Especially the more distal you are from the person. So if you witness a car accident, or if you witness someone far away from you, or something happening to someone else, you're going to get very different perspectives from everybody involved. And the more time that passes, or the way you ask the questions, which law enforcement knows this, that we can absolutely prime people with the way we ask a question.
Yeah.
So again, we can talk about all that with other cases, but none of that seems to really apply here, because the quote eyewitnesses were at such different places,
right,
and different combinations of different people. It's really hard to say. Now, I do think, however, there could be a sequence of events that happened where if it was a hoax that started with the family in the house, say it was Don and the people he was staying with, and they maybe got the landlords involved with them, if he could conveniently leave the location anytime that someone needs to come and check it out, like the newspaper wants to come, and it's not happening anymore,
Yeah.
they could really keep telling the story as the primary eyewitnesses. If all 5 of them are in on it together, there's a lot that's questionable about that. The officers become the checkpoint on that,
Yeah.
as you say, because they did see the water, unless they were being hoaxed in the house.
And then they got embarrassed.
Yeah.
Maybe the chief came and was like, you guys are idiots. The
Clearly
water's coming from here. And they're like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we don't want to look like idiots. So, and we don't like this chief. So let's try to prove him. Let's get the warden involved because he's our buddy. There's a lot of jumps. This is like a conspiracy theory now, and there's a lot of jumps you have to make. We always try to say on this podcast, what's more likely?
Right. I don't think it's necessarily that these things have to be connected. It could be that the rumor of this all happening gets back to the warden before Don even goes back from furlough. He's in his cell. And the warden might believe it. He might want to have some notoriety. I'm thinking archetypes of this, the warden from Silence of the Lambs. I'm just kind of a skee-ball and I just want some notoriety. So I want a story to tell too. All that takes is him putting some water on his shirt and calling a reverend to come in.
Yeah.
And do a blessing.
Oh, and the reverend is an easy one because they're going to want to prove
they might believe it. Yeah, so there's a person who's predisposed to believing it. I'm not super convinced of the warden component of it, to be honest, because you didn't have rain happening, right? Did I miss a part?
When the priest came in and started praying. And yeah, there was part. Hold on, there was part that was not that I didn't include. When Donnie got back, they put him into a maximum security cell with a cellmate, and he made it rain in his cell.
According to
one of the accounts.
One cellmate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's starting to become lore at this point, to become legend about him.
Right.
The more days that go by, and
except for he's still alive and he still talks about it.
Yeah. He could be spreading his own lore. If you think about a personality type that could convince people of an ability, or could say, if you tell someone that I just did it, it could incentivize it. It doesn't take much to incentivize people who are in institutional settings.
But
I will buy you some cigarettes if you just tell people this happened. I don't find that to be the most reliable setting for any of that to be believed.
Yeah. So I kind of started on this thought, but on this podcast, we try to say what's more likely, that a demon possessed a guy and he made it rain in 3 different locations, or that everybody was in on it.
I don't think it's black or white, but if it was ruled out that the places where there actually are multiple witnesses to the water, and it seems like the house is the only place that you have consistent documentation of multiple witnesses of the water. Like the pizza place, there was only the same people who were at the house and then the owner. They didn't interview any other people who were at the pizza place.
I don't know. I don't think so. But again, they were apparently told by the chief of police to don't file a report, don't interview anybody, let this go.
Yeah. This isn't great. That makes these law enforcement officers look especially unqualified to do their own job, which is you write it up no matter what.
So I'm going to finish my thought now. I just remembered it. So we usually ask what's more likely. In this case, they're both pretty unlikely.
Demonic possession or a huge conspiracy hoax.
Or a huge hoax.
Yeah.
The huge hoax sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And the possession sounds like something supernatural.
Right.
So this is a really, really tough nut to crack. Usually we can point to something and be like, but this.
Right.
And it's like, okay, yes, that. The one thing we haven't touched on is, and I don't know the proper term for it, the more modern term for it, and I apologize, but mass hysteria, or people getting into a group and groupthink or whatever.
Yeah, I almost said that when I went down the eyewitness route, but group panic. Groupthink is a real phenomenon we can talk about too. Groupthink, group panic, shared panic would be probably a newer term than mass hysteria, but it's more contagion effect of we're empathic and sensitive creatures who mirror each other's emotions. And I think that could more explain why, even if Don was hoaxing other people, or like the house is having a plumbing issue, meanwhile someone's having a dissociative episode who's in grief and shock.
Right.
And they correlate the two as a group, the couple and the landlord, and they're like, it's him. They could build each other up to have some pretty hysterical responses.
Right. It seems like the two women, the two wives did eventually gang up on him in the kitchen.
Yeah, which is again, falls right into the women in hysterics are just gonna make
What
sure.
stopped them?
No, no,
They were like, oh, maybe they're right. Shit. Like they
yeah,
didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was
nobody
going
knew what
on.
was going on.
Right.
Hmm.
Again, I always come back to this story and I find it incredibly compelling. And again, even more so that they talked obviously in the 80s, it was in the 90s with Unsolved Mysteries, and then it was kind of reconfirmed in the 2000s.
Yeah,
With the haunted episode,
yeah.
and they bring everybody back. Everybody they can. So they bring a lot of the same eyewitnesses back. Even when Donnie was rearrested for arson in 2012, the news crew interviewed Bob, and Bob tells the story again. He's like, I just can't explain it. Even to this day, they're just like, we just can't explain
Yeah.
it. But everything that we said happened. It did happen.
Yeah. So it's amazing. I mean, there are so many pieces to it where you could just keep talking about it and still. And so if it's real, it deserves a movie. It deserves books. It deserves more and more research on this guy. He needs to be studied in a lab.
It's never happened since.
He needs
So
to be incentivized for
Mhm.
making it rain. But I guess he had the idea sort of being, if he's like, it hasn't happened since, I guess I just had to get past my grandfather had to stop haunting me and poltergeisting me or giving me this
Yeah.
power or ability that it's a little confusing for him to have
Possess
no
me,
control and then
yeah.
have possessed and all that.
Or maybe his grandfather was possessed and his grandfather died and the demon hopped to him.
There you go. See, these are explanations. There could also even be that it's some poetic externalization of the grief that he couldn't process. All of
Yeah.
his tears were just outward instead of inward. He was too too frozen in his emotions to even really feel. Any different kind of spiritual or philosophical or religious belief system could create a spiritual psychological explanation for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That could be it's a demon or it's an emotional manifest, it's whatever, or it's physical X-Men power. Pieces of that sound very much like, the Phoenix in the X-Men movies. So it's a modern archetype.
Yeah. And I think there have been movies based upon it, but I don't, again, based upon Donnie's life now, I don't think he's rich. I don't think he's made a lot of money off of it or anything like that. Again, he was rearrested.
Yeah.
I think he confessed and was convicted, all that stuff.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Maybe there's a rich guy running around setting fires to things, but I guess I could have done a little more research on where he's at now.
Not all incentives are monetary.
Yeah,
Attention,
sure.
especially if a person has a streak of antisocial, it could be just causing mayhem, causing fear,
But
causing.
and he might have that,
Yeah.
but there's the other people involved who maybe all of them have it. You're
It's a-
talking about something that is a percentage of what percentage of the population is like
I
that?
don't know, maybe one in 100 or less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just got 5
Mhm.
people that were just so happened to be in that point in the bell curve.
Maybe it could have only just taken the family
Yeah.
friends who could. Why are they family friends? Maybe they cluster with people with similar motivations. So it's not beyond hoax to me.
Right.
Especially,
I
but
agree.
it is very unlikely to be a complicated hoax between all the people.
Yes.
But it is quite possible that it's a small plan that had a really big turn of events and just went wild for them and maybe worked better or worse than they expected. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, we compare a lot of things to horror movies, obviously, because those are based upon true stories, a lot of them, quote unquote.
Hmm.
And there are other Hollywood movies about hoaxes and con men going too far, right? And sometimes things taking off without them really realizing how far it took off. There's things in modern society and in modern politics where I think there are some politicians out there who started something and then it went really far and they were like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Right.
I think that's something that can totally happen for sure. But I'm with you. It's so hard though, because it's part of the other part of the reason why we started this podcast and why I wanted to start this podcast is because I used to love conspiracy theories. And then they got out of hand and people started believing them and going and shooting up pizza restaurants and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And I kind of see the same thing happening with the paranormal now, which is another one of my things that I love. I love watching paranormal shows. I love watching paranormal videos. Again, I don't believe in any of them, but this is one of those things where it's conflicting within me because I either have to believe in a conspiracy theory or I have to believe in the paranormal. That's it.
Okay.
So it's a struggle within it's my own internal struggle, but I struggle with it.
Yeah.
But yes, I do lean more towards a conspiracy, more towards, what is more likely that this one guy was possessed one time and this event has never ever happened again to him or anybody that's been recorded, or that it was a
3 to a dozen people
Right.
were involved in some.
A mass conspiracy where they haven't changed, their
Does it make it
stories.
a conspiracy? I don't know. I mean, I think it makes
That's
it
a conspiracy.
is it
Yeah.
a group of people? I mean, conspiracy is a pretty basic definition, a group of people conspiring,
Let's
but
look it up.
it's a hoax. I mean, I'm not saying this is definitely a hoax. It's just a hoax is there have been hoaxes that involve many people. Get out of hand.
A conspiracy, a secret plan by a group to do something
Yeah.
unlawful or harmful. So
Mhm.
maybe not conspiracy. I'm sure there's a second. The act of conspiring together.
Yeah.
An
That's
agreement
group.
among conspirators.
Yeah,
A
that's
group
it.
of conspirators.
That's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much. Yeah. I'm surprised this one got you so stuck. I mean, it's definitely stuck in the like, that's a really strange. Just like I keep going back to when we did the ghost hitchhikers and we kind of flew
Yeah.
past that video with the balloons.
Oh, yeah.
That was the only one where I was like, oh my gosh, there's some potential on camera physical evidence of something. But I want to go back and watch it again. I want to find more about it because
Yeah.
it's probably a hoax.
But that's just one person who posted that who could have changed it.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking time, distance, and direction. So it would have to be a conspiracy. And very pre-planned,
Yeah.
kind of genius.
Okay, so you talked about, think about the shows you watch. These are TV shows, Unsolved Mysteries,
Mhm.
and then is it you said sci-fi channel?
Where they dramatize paranormal experiences that people have.
And we know both of those shows are incentivized for it to come
Oh,
off
100%.
as. So was there
Yeah.
a journalist, is there any journalistic sources that are consistent? Was there a journalist on site the day it started, the days after, and then followed up with the warden? Like that would be really compelling to me to see some journalistic approach to studying this case.
Yeah, 1983, I think I researched this too late because there was a time period between 1983 and now where, first of all, there were a lot more local publications that hadn't been bought up by mass media, and also there weren't paywalls.
We're gonna have to go to the library in Pennsylvania.
That's right. Well, if we ever find ourselves in Pennsylvania, in Stroudsburg, then we'll have to go to the local library and look up some papers from 1983 and see.
Yeah.
It's too hard to investigate online now.
You guys would, I mean, Dustin, you have very good sleuthing abilities when it comes to finding records and knowing where you have to go to find. Sometimes you just have to go.
You have to go physically to the
person.
location.
Yeah.
Yeah. Old school, as we like to call it.
Especially in the 80s. Yep.
Yep.
And further back. So this has been interesting. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that I could tie it up in a nice little psychological science bow, but
And you can't. And that's another
can't.
part of it, right?
I love
That's,
it.
Yeah. That's another part of this, the story. And that's why, this is my ancient Rome, right? This is why I think about this story a lot. Because I'm like, but okay,
Yeah.
maybe if it's like that IT Crowd episode where he's trying to find out how someone could burn alive at SeaWorld
Mm-hmm.
because the girl he's dating.
Yes.
So he rebuilds it and he's like, oh, if
is like
they're
that.
here and she's there,
It's just like that.
then that's how it
It's
happened.
even got water involved.
Yep, there you go.
It's just like that. Oh my gosh. Because I keep going, now I'm going back to, I want to talk to a special effects expert who would know, or even anybody who would know how could you make water happen in a house and then at a restaurant. And I don't think we have enough convincing evidence that there was substantial water at the prison. I'm kind of going to rule that out as a location where anything majorly paranormal happened.
Oh.
I think it's just the house and the pizza parlor from what you've told me.
What, the priest walking around speaking out of the Bible and it raining everywhere except for on the Bible. The Bible never got wet.
I don't find that person. Again, it kind of goes back to this Unsolved Mysteries, a person who's incentivized to tell a story.
The Reverend is incentivized because he's a member of the clergy.
That, or they might have been asked by the warden to tell a story. This might be reflecting some more of my mistrust in stories that come from institutionalized settings like that decades ago. That's why I want a journalistic approach. I want more reliable sources, a more objective, reliable sources.
Unfortunately, we don't have them.
Yeah.
So this story is something that is just in the annals of history and it is truly recorded.
It is.
So it's there and we can't go back in time. So all we can do is sit here and speculate.
That's right. So
and that's with most of our stories. That's usually the truth, but it's usually a lot easier to poke holes in
it. It really is. So I do have to sit with that. I want to be open-minded, and I generally go back to, if it's something we can't explain, it's because we don't have the tools to explain it. This is just such an anomalous case where we don't often hear about water poltergeists.
Yeah.
So I can't go to we just don't have the tools to assess that thing that keeps happening, or that this is just such a discrete story. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that's another thing about like demon possession. We heard a couple of pretty common themes: 3
Yeah.
scratches, seeing a demon manifest in a mirror or a reflective surface. That's a very common theme as well. Levitation, that's a very common theme with demonic possession.
Yeah.
Rain and water, that's nowhere.
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
No.
Things defying rain and water and other substances like that, defying gravity, flying in different directions, that's not something you usually hear when it comes to ghosts or possessions or anything like that. Maybe you hear it with alien abductions because anti-gravity and there's, you're out in space or whatever it is. You'll see things like pieces of water floating around.
Yeah.
That's not something you usually hear with this type of paranormal story. So it is incredibly unique.
Right.
And just, again, if this was a conspiracy, somebody would have had to have thought of that.
I know. I love the idea of like someone's in the kitchen with a water pistol shooting at a police officer when they come through the door. Pew pew.
That's right.
So ridiculous.
Well, but that's what they would have had to. There would have had to be a bunch of them, and, shooting up from between the floorboards and whatever.
Because they couldn't just put a hose with holes in it. They would have found that.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I think you could order something off Amazon that would basically recreate this, right? That would be automated. That would be, hey, Google, turn on the demon water or whatever, and they would be able to do it.
Oh my gosh.
Google's going to respond to me right now. But back then, it would have had to be a custom built thing.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't, then you're including even more people in the conspiracy, which means there's even more of a likelihood of somebody finally coming out and being like, yeah, that was a huge hoax.
Yeah.
And the fact that nobody's come out and said it's a huge hoax yet, that's another key indicator for me because it's been 40 years.
It is interesting. I definitely want to watch some of these interviews just to see
we'll watch Haunted
the officers talking about it. Yeah.
That's another thing that I'd love to talk to you about. I know we're out of time, but like I'd love to talk to you about how we both have started watching Jack Osbourne's paranormal show.
Yeah.
And we kind of like it.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Him and Kelly and Ozzy jumps in there a couple of times, and Ozzy is apparently, this is really interesting, Ozzy Osbourne is a huge skeptic of paranormal things, and I completely understand why, because he was like, I'm the Prince of Darkness, I'm Satan, blah blah blah, and everybody's like, oh, you're gonna go to hell and everything, and
he's not scared of it. Yeah,
he's like, no, he's like, none of that stuff is real.
Yeah, even though I'm not into his music, I've never felt so like simpatico with him and having that like what, but then there are things where he was like, with that door opened twice, that really got me. Like,
well, but his kids are getting scared, so he's watching his kid like
so many layers.
Yeah, he's watching Jack and Kelly go out on these paranormal investigations, and he's Sharon sitting with him too, and she's like, "What are they doing? I can't believe it." And he's like, "Oh no, so I can't believe that they're doing this. Just get the fuck out."
It's pretty good.
Yeah. And so he's fearful for his children's life or safety, which is interesting. But Jack's I think my dad's starting to believe some of this stuff. He's like, my dad texted me and he wants me to go investigate this place. I think he was up last night late going down a rabbit hole on YouTube, and he really wants me to go investigate this place. And that might be production. That might be a lot of different things.
There's so much of that. Yeah, that I watched this and I'm like, oh, it's so cute, and I like the kids. I think they're likable and their relationship is fun, and their differences, like how different Jack and Kelly are. And at the same time, I just continue to go back to all of this could absolutely be staged, and the producers can be doing stuff. It's just completely unreliable. And then the thing that drives me nuts is the equipment. And continued speaking about these tools as if they are just validated tools for the detecting of spiritual entities.
That's right.
Yeah,
and we talked about doing an episode on that, and we're that's going to be kind of an action item for you all out there, is to keep listening, because we are eventually going to do that episode where we look at, maybe we'll do a special series where we look at a different one each time.
Yeah, and that's a turn the tables for us, for our roles. I haven't done it since the EVP episode, where I'm telling you some stories of REM pod use and MF readers and all the
Spirit boxes.
Spirit boxes. You guys have to tell us, do we do one episode at a time based on each tool? Whatever approach you'd like us to take to the methods of paranormal investigating.
That's right.
And that'll be me interviewing you.
And the best way for you to follow us is to follow us on Instagram or smash that subscribe button, y'all.
Do it.
But on Instagram, we are paranormal.outsiders. You can also email us at stories@paranormaloutsiders.com. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. I think it's one of the funnest ones we've done. At least I feel like it's one of the funnest ones we've done. And thanks for listening.
Yeah. Until next time, thanks for hanging out. Bye.